If you would be turning with me to Revelation chapter 11. We talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago, beginning in chapter 11. And we looked at the first two verses in this. And this is in essence talking about the two witnesses. And we will note what that represents here in just a little bit. I want us to just go back to verse 1 and read the first two verses before we get into the next few verses. It says, "Then there was given me a measuring rod like a staff, and someone said, 'Get up and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship in it.'" As we noted week before last in our lesson, he is noting those individuals who are God's children. And that's what this represents. And we laid that out, how this representation gives these Christians an encouragement. An encouragement that, yes, God knows who they are. God knows them. And we had noted back in chapter 6 that they had that seal placed upon their heads. And I think that is very important to understand from chapter 6 to this verse 1 and 2 actually, is that God knows His people. And when they are facing the difficulties of persecution, that they are not forgotten. And how easy it is to come to the point that we think that we have been forgotten. You know, if you ever think of a little child, was you ever a little child and you got lost from your mother at the grocery store? Man, you thought you were forgotten. Now, that was back in our day. Today, I don't know, but in our day, you thought, oh no, Mama forgot me. Well, she didn't. She was probably about ready to, well, she did when she found you, but anyway. She would give you a little encouragement not to do that anymore. But anyway, the key factor is that he's noting that, but he's also noting that there is that differentiation between those that are God's, those that have been sealed with righteousness, and those who are left out of the court. In verse 2, he says, "Leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it. For it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So we find the differentiation, the same that we find in 1 Peter and other places here within the Revelation, is the difference between those that are sealed with the seal of righteousness, those that are God's children, those that will never be forgotten, and in essence, the rest of humanity. And it's been that way from the very beginning, when you really sit down and you look at this. Now, we also noted the 42 months, and that brings to light that 1,260 days, 3.5 years, times and a half of times, that's filtered through the Revelation. And what that denotes is a time of incompleteness. In other words, what they're about to face, what's coming with Domitian and all the other persecutions throughout history, and that will be in the future. Won't be that, but just will be a short time. And the key factor here in all of this is be faithful unto death, and you will receive the crown of life. Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, the latter part there. So he's noting here, God knows who you are. God understands that you're going to go through this. But he also knows those others, those that are not his. And he understands that situation. As we continue in this, in verses 3 and 4, it says, "And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth." So, who are these 2 witnesses? Well, these 2 witnesses, again, are describing the church, the ecclesia, the called out, those that have been sealed with the seal of righteousness because they are those who are faithful. In verse 4, they are called 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands. In Zechariah chapter 4, 2 olive trees are used to denote the 2 anointed ones who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. They are Zerubbabel of the royal line and Joshua a priest. What is it that combines both the priesthood and royalty? Well, they are faithful to God. As the church, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, we are a royal priesthood. And over in Revelation 1:6, it notes that we are a kingdom of priests. And back in chapters 2 and 3, it talks about the lampstands. Remember the 7 churches? And that depiction again denotes this golden lampstand, or those who are in the presence of God, those who are faithful to God. Now there are, as we note here, many different symbols for the church in this book. Each shows us the church from a different perspective. The focus here is on the testimony of the church, and that bringing to light the idea of the gospel. That's the testimony of the church, is that the gospel is given by God, is given freely by God. We receive it by God's grace, but yet we remain faithful. And that's a key here, is our testimony is a testimony of faithfulness. Now, these 2 witnesses testify. Now, 2 is the number of confirmed testimony. And in John chapter 8, in verse 17, it is also written in your law that the testimony of 2 men is true. One person could not go before the law, the old covenant. One man could not go up and say something bad about another one. If that person had done something wrong, it took 2 witnesses. Same kind of situation today. It's my word against theirs. But if there's another witness, it makes a difference. We see the same thing in Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 6. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. 1 or 3. John chapter 5, verses 31 and 32. If I bear witness to myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who bears witness to me. I know that the testimony which he bears to me is true. Again, the 2 witnesses. In Matthew 18:6, but if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Luke 10:1. After these things, the Lord appointed others 70 also, and sent them two and two before his face to every city and place whither he himself would come. Talking about sending out those that would be sharing the gospel, doing different things. 1 Timothy 5:19. Again, an elder received not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. So, denoting the 2 witnesses here, talking about the church, talking about the testimony of the church, we are those witnesses to the world as God's children. And that was the way it was with these individuals here. Now, in this passage, it talks about, in verse 3, that they are clothed in sackcloth. Now, sackcloth was a coarse woven fabric, maybe of goat hair or camel hair, and it was worn at times of mourning or penance. And this, what they were about to face, it was not going to be good. It was not going to be kind. There was going to be some mourning. It was also the characteristic attire for the Old Testament prophets. So things were not going to be as good as maybe we would like for them to be. But they were going to endure because they were going to be faithful. It is very clear in the depiction is that the church continues to operate even while being persecuted. Rome may have trampled the church, but Rome was not able to stop the church. And when you go back and you study about a remnant from the Old Testament, there was always those that were faithful. And throughout the world, throughout the ages, there's always been that remnant, even under the New Testament. There's always been those that are faithful. And it may be to the point that you cannot openly worship God. You cannot openly talk about the Lord. But there's those that are faithful. And if you do a little study in history, it's very intriguing to see what a lot of people endured to remain faithful, just as those from the 7 churches of Asia. The proclamation of the gospel continued despite Rome's best efforts to stamp it out. And Rome tried to destroy the church. Rome tried to stamp out the church back in the 1st century. And people 2,000 years plus later are still trying to do the same thing. They're trying to stamp out Christianity. And they militaristically attack Christians, do everything that they can under the table, out the back door, whatever you want to call it, to silence Christians. Recently, there was a gentleman that brought this up in a very public forum about how Christians were being persecuted in our own backyards. And it is a truism. It's always been going on, and it always will. But we're going to remain faithful. To sum up so far, in chapter 11, John has been told to measure the temple of God. The 2 witnesses have been sent out to prophesy for 3.5 years, a short time. The message in a nutshell is that the church is going to be persecuted, but the persecution is only temporary. The sad thing about it being temporary is that we get a little break, and here it comes again. Although Rome will trample the church for a short time, the spiritual strength of the church will not be harmed. And there's so many passages that we can go and look at, thinking about who can take my faith away from me. Who can take me away from God because I'm a child of His? Well, nobody can. We have to give ourselves away, and sadly, many do. That's the sad commentary in that. As we go down to verse 5, it says, "And if anyone desires to harm them," talking about the church, "if anyone desires to harm them, fire proceeds out of their mouths and devours their enemies. And if anyone would desire to harm them in this matter, he must be killed. These have the power to shut up the sky in order that rain may not fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to smite the earth with every plague, as often as they desire. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified." These two witnesses are at first pictured as unstoppable. And in reality, Christianity is unstoppable. Jesus paid the price. It was sealed at the cross. Christianity is not going away. There's always the faithful remnant. We win. We just have a lot of battles that we must fight along the way for other souls. Here it notes anyone who harms them is doomed to be killed. They, like Elijah and Elisha, have the power to shut the sky that no rain may fall. It's going to be bad for the Romans and those who stand in opposition to Christ and to the church. We talked a little bit about all the different groups of people that attacked Rome and all the problems that Rome had for about 600 or so years. We think about what happened to the Roman Empire. And it was not easy for them. It was some hard stuff going on. You think about Genghis Khan comes down and camps on your doorstep. He's not a nice guy. And various others that dealt with the Romans. They, like Moses and Aaron, have the power to smite the earth with plagues. And you can think about that. What kind of plagues came through and around and about and out the Roman Empire? Well, there were plagues. I think about plagues like that and how devastating they are to the people. But it happened throughout the time, throughout the ages. The beast is introduced here, but will not assume a leading role in the Revelation narrative until chapter 13. Once the witness have complete the delivery of their message, the beast rises from the bottomless pit to kill them. Their death will be cause for rejoicing among the people who tired of hearing the witness's message that condemned their acts of worldliness. Those, as we noted in verse 2, who are outside, they will reap the consequence of their choices and their actions. And this is a reality, whether it be in this world or in the after a while. is this defeat a permanent defeat? Well, no. Rome will be dealt with. The beast, which we will see later, does not have the final victory over the church. We know this, if for no other reason, because Daniel told us so 600 years before these events occurred. In Daniel chapter 7, going down to verse 23, and I encourage you, go do a study of Daniel. It really helps us understand what's going on here with Rome, the Revelation, and all of those things. Let's look at this. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. And he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. And he will intend to make alterations in time and in law. And they will give to his hand for a time, times and a half a time. Short situation there. Verse 26. But the crown will set for judgment, and his dominion will take away, annihilated and destroyed forever. When the sovereignty of the dominion and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heavens will be given to the people of the saints of the Highest One, his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Rome, and this is what Daniel's writing about here, will fall. And Rome fell. At least the nation of Rome fell. The great city of verse 8 is an allegory called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. This analogy is called 3 cities or nations: Sodom, Egypt, and Jerusalem, where the city where the Lord was crucified. So here again, great cities, but cities that had fallen to ungodliness. The allegory of each of these localities: Rome, like Sodom, was a center of iniquity. Rome, like Egypt, oppressed and persecuted God's people. Rome, like Jerusalem, promoted a false religion. They fell. This is the allegory that is noted within, of course, this context. It talks about Babylon. The city here is called Great, and Babylon is called Great 10 times in Revelation. For example, in 14:8, we read, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she made all nations drink the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Rome, like Babylon, persecuted God's people and promoted false religion. Anything from emperor worship to pagan worship. And literally the list goes on and on. Much less what was going on with the Jewish people of the time, and them making changes to the law of Moses, so on and so forth. John sees this great city as a spiritual Sodom, in its moral depravity as the Egyptian, holding all people in bondage to lust and sin, and as Jerusalem that rejected truth and put to death the author of truth. Rome and the Roman Empire and all of these individuals, they were about as immoral as the day is long. And if you go back and you look at some of these leaders, rulers from Rome, they were about some of the most ungodly people that you ever run across in your life. Kind of like the ones that we run across every day as we walk down the street sometimes. But they were awful. And as far as morality, morals in Rome was horrendous. And that fed back into the pagan religions. Because a lot of the aspects of the pagan religions was immoral actions. And I'm trying to be kind here. And hopefully you understand that to be part of these pagan religions was to imbibe in ungodly practices with other people and other things, and was not good. Well, they're going to face the difficulty with that because of the persecution that they laid upon the church and upon Christians. Every description of the villain in this book fits Rome perfectly, and this description is no exception. The great city pictured here is Rome. And that was the problem that the seven churches of Asia was facing. Now, does that mean this has happened in the future or after this? Absolutely. Same thing has gone on in the world. But specifically, we're talking about seven churches of Asia. We're talking about Rome. We're talking about the persecution of Domitian. But yet, the church has faced persecution throughout the years, and is currently. Some places are worse than others. Persecution is a reality. Let's look at the next two verses right quick. I didn't know how far I was going to get through here tonight. Verses 9 and 10. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate. And they will send gifts to one another because these two prophets tormented those who dwelled on the earth. That last phrase there, a little bit encouraging. Their merriment proved short-lived. However, for a fine apocalyptic fashion, the faithful two are resurrected from the dead like the man whom Elijah restored to life. 2 Kings 13, verse 21. The dry bones of the house of Israel over at Ezekiel, chapter 37 and verse 10. The master who had commissioned them to proclaim the gospel even to the point of martyrdom fulfilled his promise and raised them out of the earth to a place of reward. You know, there have been those who shared the gospel even though their life was taken from them. And it's here, as we note in the seven churches of Asia, in Rome, that area, and throughout the ages. With righteous indignation, God couples this assertion with an earthquake that renders a partial judgment upon the fleshly world, causing the survivors to reconsider their wickedness, if only insincerely and temporarily. God let them know, look, you need to straighten this thing up. You need to do what you need to be doing. Now, sometimes they did not do that very well. perseverance of the witnesses while they preach, the reaction of the wicked, the witness eventually demised, an eternal reward will illustrate to the first century Christians and us the wisdom in holding fast to God's word in season and out of season. Even though we're going to struggle, the end result is the blessing of an eternity in that heavenly abode with God in opposition to an eternity in the abyss with Satan and his angels. No particular historical event is being considered in these symbols, but rather the truth of the matter, whatever truth is preached, and righteous men are troubled. And it's a reality. If we get out and we are preaching God's truth, if we teach God's truth, I promise there is going to be someone that's not going to like it. And they will stand diametrically opposed to you, if not more. Verses 9 and 10 paint a vivid portrait of the wicked world, celebrating the death of the two witnesses. Evil men had once celebrated the death of Jesus, no doubt thinking that they had at last overcome him and had the last word. And yet look at what happened just a few days later. He was raised from the dead. The evil celebrants in these verses are about to relive that history. Things are not what they seem to these folks. So how long do they gloat? Well, again, that 3.5 days, or that temporary thing. The world celebration is not permanent, but temporary. That celebration is not going to last long, and the celebration of what they had done to the Christians there at Rome and Asia Minor, it didn't last very long, because this apparent defeat is not really a defeat at all, or just as Jesus' apparent defeat on the cross was no defeat of Jesus at all, but rather was the defeat of the world and of Satan, the prince of this world. Those who hate the church celebrate and rejoice at its apparent demise. Verse 10 tells us that the church has been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. Think about that just a minute. Those people that dwell on the earth, that's the group from verse 2 that's outside. And the church just torments them because they just don't want to give in to the truth. Because those who dwell on the earth were evil, they didn't like to be reminded of that fact. And same today. Torment to those living in sin, we do not set before them an example of righteous living that would create such torment in them. Or do we set that? Well, we don't want to, because we don't want them to be tormented. We want to share the truth with them that they might be led to repentance. The church is not only the light of the world and the salt of the world, but salt sometimes does torment them if they allow it to be that way. And folks, it is very evident that there are a lot of people that are struggling in our world right now that are tormented because of God's truth. I want us to stop here at verse 11 because we're getting into the seventh trumpet. So this kind of leads us into the seventh trumpet. And we'll start and look at that, if the Lord's willing, next Wednesday evening. We'll talk about the seventh trumpet.